There is no hero in this story. That is, one key figure is present, but it is not a hero at all. And not even a villain. He's just doing his job. But this is not about that. His time has not yet come. This story took place during the plague. Pestilence depopulated many cities, like an avalanche, passed from one country to another. No one was ready for this, no one expected this. The plague came suddenly and took everyone away, sparing no one. The children and the weak always went first, then everyone else. Many minds of medical sciences of that time tried to stop the infection, but nothing helped. Prayers and rituals were also powerless. The priests kept saying that God was disappointed in people and sent pestilence for purification. The madmen shouted about the coming of the end of the world. Out of desperation, many died of their own free will. Someone out of fear, someone just didn't want to fall victim to the plague. The other part obediently waited for their fate, abandoning all business or continuing to live. Only a small fraction still tried to fight, despite the unsuccessful attempts of doctors and priests. If you look from the outside, without delving into the essence of what is happening, it may seem as if everyone has gone crazy. Then they climb into the loops, then they just sit like dolls, then they imitate the daily routine, puppets under the power of an invisible puppeteer. Here, for example, a blacksmith hits the anvil, hits hard so that the sword is sharper and stronger. What for? After all, this sharp and strong sword will not be needed by a good fellow, having decided to give his life to protect the motherland. But the blacksmith still hopes for a bright future, hopes that a noble young man will take this sword, hopes that he will continue to forge such swords. From time to time, the blacksmith flashes a light of doubt, stops for a moment, thinks, then continues working again, dispelling all doubts. But the unpleasant aftertaste still remained. Now let's look at the dressmaker. She's sitting there sewing dresses. The question also arises, why? This is already her habit, there are no hopes, she just does her job and that's it. If her fate comes to die, it is God's will. But still trembles at the mention of infection, afraid of a terrible fate. I often thought of leaving my life myself, but I'm weak in spirit. Of course, she also sometimes hoped for the best, that she would continue to sew dresses for beautiful ladies, that she would continue to sew clothes for the poor and needy. But all these hopes were dashed when she saw a coffin being carried down the street and a bell ringing. It remained only to embroider jackets and dresses, which hardly anyone needs now. If only to the dead. It is not necessary to go far for the dolls. Here, for example, is the beautiful Dolores. A famous dancer for the whole city of an old pub, always striking with her angelic innocence, sometimes silly, and at the same time everyone's favorite virtuous. Now her pale skin had faded, her blue eyes stared blindly into nowhere, having lost their luster. The full body became a bag of bones. No, she didn't eat, it's just that the stress affected the poor thing so much. That's what Dolores' mom thought, taking care of her beautiful daughter so hard. She just ate with difficulty, without much desire. Suicides. They have always been there. Despite the fact that such a thing is punishable by the law of God, some decided on such a terrible act. So, for example, the eternally drunk and young Gregory. A ladies' man, a frequent guest of balls and beds, the always cheerful Gregory came to this conclusion: let me leave as a sinner, but I will not give myself to the plague. He no longer saw the point of living on, hoping for the best. He wanted to believe that the plague would go away, that he would attend balls again, that he would climb under the dresses of beautiful girls again, but at the sight of the dead on the street, tears welled up in his eyes, and all faith broke like glass. Gregory looked at the noose hanging firmly on the beam. He stood on a stool, stuck his head through the loop, and looked at the window for the last time. Once he had a beautiful view of the city, but now only gray houses and darkness, and so for a long time. After all, it's true, when did the plague come to the city? Those who saw it won't say they've been sleeping underground for a long time. But Gregory was not going to meet with pestilence. One push, and he will go into oblivion. Now we have moved on to the guest of this whole carnival of horror and suffering. Pestilence himself is a walking dead man, with a swollen plum-colored face. He was floating around the city, a dark haze was spreading from under his gray hoodie, penetrating into every house, infecting everyone present. In his hands he held an open bag, where the souls of the dead fell, flying out of the houses in white haze. A single whole eye, turning in different directions, managed to find the living and control the flow of the dead. Two ugly dwarfs, hunchbacked and crooked, circled around Pestilence, notifying of his arrival. Half the city was in his bag. From there came the mournful chanting of 100 voices. And only Pestilence enjoyed his own chorus. The deadly haze reached the blacksmith, covering his body with growths. His eyes began to bleed, black vomit escaped from his mouth. The blacksmith's strength was leaving him. He released the hammer from his mighty hand, right on his leg, but he did not feel any pain. His foot turned into a bloody mess of bones and flesh. The blacksmith fell dead near the anvil, hitting his head. Like a porcelain doll, with a broken face, useless to anyone, the blacksmith lay, gradually decomposing and turning into a skeleton. The fire in the furnace was still burning, the unfinished sword remained on the anvil. It is unlikely that a valiant warrior will take it now. The same thing happened with the dressmaker, and with the beautiful Dolores. The dressmaker accidentally punctured the growths when she was struggling in agony, touching a jar of needles with her hand, thereby hastening her death. Black and red blood stained the walls of the tailor shop. Poor Dolores was just laughing hysterically. Now she looked like a sack of potatoes. Dolores stretched her arms up and shouted, "May the Lord take care of me, at least there, at home." She coughed up black goo and closed her eyes. Another city fell victim to the plague. Another bag was full. Pestilence gave the bag to the dwarfs, and he went on, quietly singing a lullaby. There are still plenty of souls ahead, good and bad, sweet and bitter, light and dark. The time will come when he will collect all the earthly collection. Unless, of course, there is someone who will stop him. But Moore hopes that he will still have time to complete his work. After all, no one knows where he will go next. Isn't it?